Right, and Ewan?
Hello.
What video game trivia blew your mind?
I'm very easily impressed, so it doesn't take much to blow my mind.
Okay.
But this is kind of one thing that I always come back to. One of my favourite bits of video game journalism ever was a deep dive by Game Informer. This is after LucasArts kind of, dissolved after the Disney acquisition of Lucasfilm and everything. They shut LucasArts down. R.I.P. Big shame. They did a big deep dive into the kind of tumultuous final era of the company where a bunch of games got cancelled, all sorts of weirdness happened, and so many gone. And the one that really stood out to me, in amidst all this, this kind of really sad story of this great video game publisher and developer kind of going on the way out, was a story from the development of The Force Unleashed, which is a game that I'm sure a lot of people have. Some people hold it near and dear to their hearts, other people are kind of like, well, it's a bit cringe. I love it. It's cringe, but I love it. It's cringe but free, essentially. And during the development of that game, they got George Lucas's input, because it was going to be a big canon thing. It was going to be like, it's going to be set before Episode 4, and it's going to be about Darth Vader. This is going to be how the Rebel Alliance got built, and we're going to do everything with it. And so they brought in Sam Witwer, who obviously came back to do Darth Maul in the Clone Wars stuff and did a bunch of other stuff. And he plays the role of Starkiller. Now, in creating the name of Starkiller, guys at LucasArts were like, we need to give him a Darth name. What kind of Darth name can we come up with? So you know what we'll do? We'll get George Lucas. We'll ask George Lucas, what Darth name can we give?
George Lucas famously creates great names.
Yes, he does. Darth Tyrannus, nuance. General Grievous, does what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
Darth Maul, Malice,
Droopy
bad.
McCool.
Darth Sidious, Droopy McCool,
awesome.
Mars Guo, the best of all. But yeah, so they were like, hey George, can we have a Darth name for Starkiller? They're thinking that they're gonna get the most amazing thing, right? They'll get like Darth Rancid or Darth Putricus or something like that. Again, some patent pending. And you know what he came back with?
Tell me.
Darth Insanius.
Not that bad.
And Darth Icky.
Worse.
And according to this write-up, this was purely unironic from George. And I kind of wish that everyone in Luke, and apparently everyone at the meeting was just kind of like, and I just kind of wanted the kind of the Office style camera zooms around the table as this was so Darth Insanius and Darth Icky were the names that he pitched for Starkiller, which desperately sad that they never made it to the finished release. And I love George Lucas, only good ideas. Darth Insanius, Darth Icky. Perfect.
I want to talk about Metal Gear Solid because the trajectory of that franchise, the amount of Hideo Kojima-ness that was injected more and more into that IP as it rolled out, I feel like it's worth pointing out that the original Metal Gear Solid always had a different feel, a different flavour, a different general tonality that I absolutely loved back in the day. Very much 90s action movies kind of infused with anime, or the other way around, or whatever. Point being that Metal Gear Solid 2 was when it got ridiculous, when we had water-walking vampires and the president with the octopus camo and everything else. I love it. I love the whole thing. I love Metal Gear so much. I'm a big Kojima fan. However, it is worth pointing out that only one person translated that whole game back in the 90s, Metal Gear Solid, because Konami literally had like one dude who could speak Japanese and English. One guy, Jeremy Blaustein. Shout out to that dude. There's a whole write-up, I think it's over on Polygon, from a good few years ago, talking about the reality of what it was like bringing a game across that was that big from the east to the west, and how they literally just gave it to a dude. I think he had like 2 weeks to turn the whole thing around, and literally just sort of like started bringing in all these different terms, all these different reference points from 90s action movies, because he thought that's what it was supposed to be like, and made this kind of general feel of Metal Gear Solid 1 that a lot of people fell in love with. Hideo Kojima, not one of them. He was like, why the hell have you changed my original IP so much? And that's why over the course of that entire franchise, it only became more wacky and animated and ridiculous, because Kojima demanded full creative control and to never let that dude do his thing again.
Gary Translator, get him back.
Big Mr. I would love get that guy back to help.
Get that man off my franchise.
Yeah, like get that guy back to write the next Metal Gear, because it's all super grounded. I mean, I love Metal Gear Solid 1. It is my favorite one, and I love that tone. So I'm just shouting out that one specific translator, Jeremy Blaustein, who turned that whole thing around. Kind of like Final Fantasy VII. That's another one where they give it to one person with all the translation errors, whatever, to try and make it work. So yeah, shouting that out from me to you, Andrew.
Of course, I had to pick a piece of Resident Evil trivia. The question really is finding something that interests other people and not just super nerds like me. But I've landed on something that I always loved, and hopefully you guys will appreciate this, because I don't see anyone ever talking about this. You do see people talking about how Claire Redfield, one of the protagonists from Resident Evil 2, was originally Elsa Walker, right? Resident Evil 2 got to about 80% complete, it was scrapped, restarted, Elsa became Claire to make a connection between Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2, because there are no characters that actually carry over from the original to the sequel, so it was a link. But the thing is, they actually already had a link with this character in the concepting phase that they threw out before they came back around to that idea. It was just a lot more tenuous. There are a lot of soldier bros that you come across in Resident Evil, dead bodies or otherwise nearly dead bodies, to kind of, you know, show the devastation of the Spencer mansion, and one of these is a bloke on a balcony called Forrest Speyer. He's actually one of Chris's closest friends. He's a sniper guy, tattoo, he wears a denim vest actually, this was unintentional, and he gives you the grenade launcher. His name was Forrest Speyer. Elsa Walker's concepting name was Rachel Speyer. She was going to be the brother of this rather minor character, which is really interesting to me because that's such a small link that it seems really obvious you would go with like a Chris or a Jill or a Barry. No, at first they were thinking just one of the generic soldier guys. I love the STARS team, it just seems like a strange choice. But more than that, it really makes me think, because Claire Redfield, her whole thing in Resident Evil 2 is she comes to Raccoon City to find her brother Chris, which she eventually does do in Code Veronica. If she was Rachel Speyer, she comes into that city to look, looking for her brother Forrest, which doesn't really end well for her. It's a rather tragic story because he's already been pecked to death by crows. So yeah, not only was Claire Redfield originally Elsa Walker, before that, she was Rachel Speyer.
Joe, which video game trivia facts blew your mind?
Well, this is something I learned quite recently when I was listening to the Something Rotten podcast. So I feel I'll just give a shout out to them. They were talking about Manhunt. So, we all remember Manhunt?
Yeah.
It's quite a good game, wasn't it?
Quite
a good game. Probably not going to put any footage of it up.
No, pretty anti-YouTube. That.
Yeah, certainly. So, that was made, well, it came out in 2003, so it will have been, 2002 probably they were developing it, and it was in the really early days of motion capture and performance capture. I think they may have done some on some of the GTA games at that point, but it may well have been the fact that Manhunt was certainly one of the first that Rockstar were using mocap. And anyway, none of the characters are sort of hugely well developed. Obviously, you've got Brian Cox in there as Starkweather, Lionel Starkweather, which is sort of weirdly surprising. James Earl Cash is just kind of barely a character, really. He's just this big hulking dude. But anyway, there's these guys. Remember Cerberus?
The evil dudes.
The sort of like evil SWAT team guys who look like Hunk from Resident Evil.
Yes.
So those guys, to get the mocap for them, or the performance capture, they just needed like someone with like a little bit of physicality. Just someone sort of quite big, probably quite brutish, quite strong, who could kind of do these movements a bit. But obviously, they went for someone who kind of just an unknown person, really, like just an unknown quantity. They didn't need someone for their actual voice or likeness or acting prowess or whatever, so they just got some guy, pretty much. And that man's name was Jon Bernthal.
What?
Jon Bernthal, yeah, and it's like, they didn't get him in because he was Jon Bernthal.
The Jon Bernthal.
The Jon Bernthal, right?
A man called
the Jon Bernthal, yes. Who's since been the face and voice in several video games and is massive now. But at this point, he had like one TV credit and one very minor film credit to his name, I think. This guy was not someone who was known. He doesn't even do the voice of Cerberus. That's someone completely different. And if Manhunt was being made now, they would get Jon Bernthal to play Cash and do the performance capture and his voice and his likeness, I'm sure, because he'd be a really bankable person to play James Earl Cash, because the guy's an absolute brute. And I just find it really funny that actually he was just like some guy they brought in to do like a minor bit of performance capture, probably because he was cheap.
You gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, and now he's Jon Bernthal. I mean, he was always Jon Bernthal, but now he's Jon Bernthal. Like, what a guy.
Josh.
Hey, Joe.
What
piece of video game trivia blew your mind?
Well, what I love from the stories of game development is always the idea that creatives ask for forgiveness rather than permission to do something bold and interesting with a game idea or a mechanic or whatever. And it's fascinating to me now, 15 years on from the release of Call of Duty World at War, to learn that the zombies mode in that game was this kind of secretive thing that was in development on the side that pretty much nobody wanted to do. I was reading a really good Polygon piece before coming in here just to brush up on the facts, and it's fascinating that kind of was born out of a couple people's desire to make something different because they were frustrated with the way the development was going on World at War, which was famously kind of all over the place until it wasn't. And when that kind of the boss of Treyarch at the time kind of realized what they were making, all hell broke loose, and he thought, we cannot make a zombie, round-based experience that's co-op. We'll be the laughingstock of the entire industry. We will kill COD forever. Nobody wants to play a zombie game in a gritty World War II shooter. They just thought it would be the absolute worst thing that's ever happened. And Activision
famously proved right.
Well, here's the thing. I don't even love World at War zombies. I'm not a huge COD zombies guy, but I love that this went from that to one of the most defining staples of an entire franchise. It was someone who took a risk, went against what their bosses kind of wanted them to make, went against what the publisher thought would sell, and managed to make something a little bit inventive, a little bit unique that obviously found this player base and then became this defining feature. Because the reason that they could do it, again according to this Polygon piece, the reason that it was at all allowed in World at War was because it was a secret mode, because they weren't allowed to market it, they weren't allowed to advertise it at first. They just kind of said, you can have it in there if you beat the campaign and put it in as a secret mode at the end for people to unlock. We are not selling this game on a zombies mode, which obviously is hilarious in hindsight, because the next Treyarch game will be sold on the zombies mode. I just think that's really interesting, and I want more stories like that. So tell me if you've got any. I feast on stories like this.